Hey, TechKnowStuds. We need to set reasonable expectations and policies for our end users, especially when it comes to password management and identity and access management. So in this lesson, let's take a look at what we would set out for our users and expect of them. Here's a comic strip from 20 years ago. And essentially what it is the top part is talking about how we've set an expectation for really stupid passwords. Passwords that are really easy for a computer to guess, but also are really hard for users to remember. And that there is a much better method out there that makes it much harder for computers to guess and much easier for humans to remember. However, the thing is here we are 20 years after this comic strip, and we still don't get the point. We still are focusing in on the wrong areas. So our job as system administrators and security professionals is to set reasonable policies that people can follow, and then train them on what they need to follow, but also how come they need to follow. What is the downsides if they don't follow those reasonable policies? And then do a ton of testing to make sure that people are actually following through with what you're training them to do. Now, what I found is that we a lot of times require our users to have a password of a certain length. Many times that length isn't adequate enough though. And so that's one of the areas that I think that we're always a little weak on, or a lot of times a little weak on. We also require them to have complexity. Well, when you require complexity, a lot of times they'll just tag something on the end of a word, or they will do common substitution, which doesn't improve security all that much. And then we require some sort of changing of passwords. Well, what happens is if you require your users to change passwords, they'll just start out with a 01, and then the next one will be a 02, and then a 03, which really defeats the purpose of why we're changing the password. And then we require them to have a password per account, which I really firmly believe that is really important. But the thing is when you combine all of these, you start creating this really hard level that a lot of users can't follow. So then they start writing things down, or they start making really simple passwords like this that really don't contribute to security much at all. So when you are enforcing passwords, you want to make policies on your network. You want to use things like group policy to enforce this. You want to set up things on your network to help enforce this. So what do we want to set up? Well, MFA definitely is a necessity. I would vote for longer passwords rather than having some sort of complexity, because you start adding complexity, they just bypass things. So a longer password, generally people can come up with some sort of password, a longer password phrase, or something that is more unique using maybe 4 or 5, 6 maybe dictionary words if you train them to use those right. And then have a maximum number of attempts that they can have. So this really stops if somebody's trying to hack the system, hack the account, then they can only try so many passwords before that they're locked out of the system. Also, if they walk away from their computer, we want it to lock. So make sure you have screen passwords on your systems. Don't make your users change their passwords regularly, because that's going to promote bad password habits, is what we found, is that doesn't improve security. So we probably should be changing our passwords, or at least certain passwords, on a regular basis, but don't make your users regularly change their passwords, because that can be problematic. And then make sure you allow copy and paste, and then start rolling out things like password managers so people can copy and paste from password manager, and then have machine generated passwords. Don't ever use temp passwords. That is, if you get a piece of equipment or if you get software and you set it up, change that default password to something else. You also want to help your users out by setting up single sign-on. This is going to equip them with tools so that they can have a more complex password, a password that is much more secure, and then they can log into the system and have access to many other systems with single sign-on. Also, as an IT IT department, you need to make sure you're setting the precedents. All too often, I've been a part of IT departments that have set some sort of generic, simple password that is the same for a lot of different users. And those users don't either change those passwords, or you're at the very least, you're setting a precedence for what passwords look like. So make sure that you have more complex passwords and find out ways that you can get around with giving even these passwords out. You want them to set the password, which brings it to the password reset process. Make sure in all your systems you have a fairly easy password reset process that they can go through. And then also make sure you're doing some sort of enforcement, because if you just put the policies out there but don't enforce them, then that's going to be problematic as well. That your users are not going to have any motivation to not put terrible passwords, and many of them will still continue to do terrible passwords. Now the thing is a lot of people are stuck into recommendations that happened 30 years ago, and things have changed since then, and things will continue to change. So although I've gone over some highlights of what is recommended now, really you need to be researching what is recommended at any given time and adapt to it. So we need to adapt these policies to what is the most recent recommendations that they find is going to be the best way to implement security on your network and in your infrastructure for your organization.